10 video feeds still glowing on the conference screen, 10 CEOs from 3 continents still watching, when the cold voice cut through the speaker. "We won't be needing you anymore. Security will escort you out." Not in a private email, not behind closed doors, but in the middle of a global call that could have changed corporate history. The $1.8 billion merger had just died on the spot. And the man who killed it actually thought he'd won. My name is Natalie Ward, and at 9:37 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I was orchestrating what should have been the crown jewel of my career, a $1.8 billion cross-continental merger that had consumed 11 months of my life. The conference room's massive screen displayed 10 faces, CEOs from New York, London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, Singapore, and half a dozen other financial capitals, all waiting for my signal to begin the final review before signing. I'd positioned my laptop at the perfect angle, papers spread across the mahogany table in careful order, the Japanese contracts to my left, European Regulatory Approval Center, American securities filings to the right. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to pull up the first slide of the presentation I'd rehearsed until the words flowed like water. "Good morning from New York. Good evening to our colleagues in Asia," I began, my voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd navigated cultural minefields and time zone mathematics for 15 years. "Today marks the culmination of—" "Actually, Natalie, let me stop you right there." Victor Kane's voice sliced through my introduction like a scalpel through silk. Our CEO, barely 2 years in the position, still learning where the executive bathrooms were located, appeared in his own video window, broadcasting from his office 3 floors up. His Harvard MBA gleamed as bright as his veneered teeth, both acquisitions from the last 5 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor continued, addressing the global audience while I sat frozen, my hands still poised over the keyboard. "Before we proceed, I need to inform you of an immediate restructuring in our international operations team." The words, immediate restructuring, in corporate speak, are like hearing a smoke alarm at 3 a.m. Nothing good follows. My stomach tightened, but I maintained my expression. 20 years in this business teaches you to keep your face neutral while your world reshapes itself. Ms. Ward's position as Director of International Coordination has been eliminated, effective immediately. Victor's tone carried the casual cruelty of someone ordering coffee. "Security is already on their way to escort her from the building. I'll be personally handling the remainder of this call." The conference room door opened. 2 security guards stood in the frame, men I'd greeted by name every morning for a decade, now avoiding my eyes like I'd become radioactive. On screen, 10 CEOs sat in various states of shock. Yamamoto-san in Tokyo had actually taken off his glasses to clean them, as if the lenses might be deceiving him. Elizabeth Brenner in Frankfurt had her hand partially covering her mouth. These were people I'd spent hundreds of hours with, building trust, one video call, one dinner, one painstakingly translated document at a time. "Mr. Kane," Brenner spoke first, her English crisp despite her obvious discomfort. "This is highly irregular. Ms. Ward has been our primary liaison throughout this entire process." "Which is exactly why fresh leadership is needed," Victor responded, sliding into my chair with the satisfied expression of a conquest completed. Behind him, someone else entered the frame, a young man in his 30s, all eager ambition and poorly fitted suit, clearly the pre-selected replacement who'd been waiting in the wings. "I'm sure you'll find Marcus here equally capable," Victor continued, gesturing to his plant. "He's been fully briefed on the project." Fully briefed. 11 months of negotiations, 3 different legal systems, countless cultural protocols that couldn't be learned from any briefing reduced to a line item on someone's transition checklist. I stood slowly, maintaining dignity even as my career imploded on international broadcast. My hands moved with practiced calm, closing my laptop, gathering the contracts that would now never bear my signature. Each movement deliberate, unhurried, while inside my mind raced through 15 years of moments that had led to this public execution. "Ms. Ward," one of the security guards finally spoke, his voice apologetic but firm. "We need to go." I nodded once, picked up my leather portfolio, a gift from the Tokyo team after our first successful joint venture, and turned toward the door, but not before catching sight of Victor's expression in the screen's reflection, pure, Undisguised triumph. He thought he'd won. He thought this was his victory lap, his moment of corporate glory. He had no idea what I'd built into the architecture of this deal. No idea at all. The security guards flanked me through the hallway like I was some corporate criminal, past the cubicles where assistants pretended not to stare, past the break room where conversations died mid-sentence. 15 years of my life lined these walls, photographs from successful closings, awards from industry associations, a framed letter from the Japanese Ministry of Commerce thanking me for facilitating better trade relations. All of it now just decoration for my walk of shame. But as we moved toward the elevator, my mind wasn't on the humiliation. It was traveling backward, through years of 14-hour days and 7-day weeks, through sacrifices that had seemed so logical at the time, but now felt like pieces of myself I'd auctioned off for a corner office I'd just lost. I remembered my first day at the company, 26 years old with a bachelor's in international business and dreams bigger than my studio apartment, the night classes in Mandarin, Japanese, and German paid for with my own credit cards, because professional development funds didn't cover languages back then. Sitting in those plastic chairs at 10 p.m. after full workdays, conjugating verbs while my friends were out living their 20s. The early years were a blur of assistant work fetching coffee for executives who couldn't pronounce my last name, taking notes in meetings where my ideas were repeated by male colleagues and suddenly became brilliant. But I learned. Every dismissive comment taught me to document everything. Every stolen idea taught me to build relationships directly with decision-makers. Every closed door taught me to find windows. My first breakthrough came during the Stuttgart acquisition in 2013. The deal was falling apart over a translation error someone had used Google Translate for a critical clause about intellectual property rights, creating a $10 million misunderstanding. I'd caught it during my review, spent 17 hours straight on the phone with lawyers in 3 time zones, and saved the merger. That's when they finally noticed me. That's when I became valuable. From there, the trajectory seemed inevitable. Director of International Coordination by 35, the go-to person for any deal involving multiple continents, the one who understood that business in Tokyo meant accepting business cards with both hands and actually reading them, that Germans appreciated directness, but Koreans required 3 meetings before the real negotiation began, that showing up to a Mumbai negotiation without understanding cricket was like arriving unarmed. But every success had its shadow price. My marriage to David collapsed somewhere between the Beijing expansion and the London joint venture. He'd said I was married to the job, and he wasn't wrong. When he served the divorce papers, I was in Singapore, finalizing a partnership that would increase our market cap by 12%. I signed both documents the same day, one that made the company richer, one that made me alone. My daughter Emma grew up seeing me more on video calls than in person. "Mommy's in Germany" became her explanation to teachers when I missed school plays. "Mommy's closing a deal." When I wasn't at birthday parties, she's 19 now, at college in Boston, and last month when I called, she said she was too busy with finals to talk. The irony wasn't lost on me. I taught her priorities by example. Victor Kane arrived 2 years ago, all flash and Harvard confidence, talking about disruption and paradigm shifts like they were magical incantations. He'd never closed an international deal, never spent months building trust with cautious partners, never learned that in some cultures, the real agreement happened over dinner, not in boardrooms, but he had something I didn't: the right chromosomes and the right connections, private equity backing from his father's golf buddies, a board that saw my careful relationship building as too slow for modern business. I'd watched him systematically replace the old guard with his people younger, cheaper, more eager to please. The CFO who'd mentored me was pushed into early retirement. The legal team that understood international compliance was restructured into a handful of yes men. And now, finally, it was my turn. The elevator arrived with its familiar ding. As the doors opened, my phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Patricia. He brought Marcus in an hour ago, had him waiting in the admin conference room. This was planned. Nat. Of course it was. Victor didn't make moves without choreography. This public execution wasn't just about removing me, it was about showing 10 global CEOs that he was in charge, that the old way of doing business was dead. He wanted them to see him as the new power, The disruptor who wouldn't be constrained by the careful protocols and relationships I'd spent years building. He had no idea those relationships were the only thing holding this deal together. No idea that respect, once shattered, couldn't be PowerPointed back into existence. The security guard pressed the lobby button. 23 floors down. 23 floors to process 15 years of work, reduced to a security escort and a cardboard box that would be mailed to me later. But I wasn't thinking about the past anymore. I was thinking about the clause I'd inserted on page 247 of the merger agreement 6 months ago, the one Victor had signed without reading, too busy reviewing the marketing deck to notice the legal addendum that made me, specifically me, irreplaceable. The elevator descended in silence, but my phone kept buzzing. Patricia again. Found something. 3 weeks ago, Victor sent an email to Marcus about camera angles for the transition. He CC'd you by mistake. Remember? I remembered. At the time, I dismissed it as another one of Victor's theatrical productions. He was always filming something for LinkedIn or the company blog. But now the words took on new meaning. Camera angles. Transition. He'd been planning to record my termination, to turn my professional execution into content, into some kind of leadership victory reel he could shop around at CEO summits. Another text, this time from James in IT. Nat, he had us set up recording equipment in conference room A this morning. Said it was for documentation purposes. I'm sorry. I didn't know. So that's what this was, not just a termination, but a performance. Victor had staged my humiliation in front of 10 global CEOs, recorded it from multiple angles, probably already had some 25-year-old social media strategist ready to cut it into bite-sized pieces of corporate dominance, the new CEO establishing his authority by publicly destroying the old guard. It would play well with his private equity backers, the ones who valued optics over operations. The elevator passed the 15th floor, and my mind shifted to 6 months ago. When the merger documents were being finalized, Victor had been in Cabo, working remotely, which meant posting beach photos while the legal team and I hammered out 500 pages of terms and conditions. He'd demanded we send him the signature pages electronically. Didn't want to cut his vacation short for administrative tasks. That's when I'd done it. Buried on page 247 in the subsection about operational continuity, I'd inserted the principal liaison clause. It was elegant in its simplicity. Any change in the designated principal liaison before the final signing would trigger a mandatory 60-day review period, during which all parties could withdraw without penalty. More importantly, it specified that the principal liaison me held the unique authentication protocols for finalizing the transfer. The other CEOs had noticed it immediately. Of course, Yamamoto-san had called me directly, "Ward-san, this clause, it makes you indispensable to the completion of this merger. It protects all parties from internal instability," I'd replied. "If someone tries to disrupt the deal at the last minute by changing key personnel, you have an exit strategy." "And if someone tries to remove you," he'd asked. "Then the deal dies," I'd said simply. They'd all agreed. After years of working with me, they trusted my judgment more than they trusted our company's stability under new leadership. The clause was their insurance policy against exactly the kind of power play Victor was attempting now. But Victor, he'd signed it without reading it. Between Instagram posts from his infinity pool, his assistant had even sent back a note. "Mr. Kane has executed the signature pages. He said to tell you good job with all the legal stuff." The legal stuff, $500 million in intellectual property rights, $800 million in manufacturing assets, another $500 million in future contracts, all of it protected by legal stuff he couldn't be bothered to read. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Elizabeth Brenner from Frankfurt. Texting directly, "Natalie, is the principal liaison clause now in effect?" Then Yamamoto. "Ward-san, shall we invoke section 247? They knew. Of course they knew. These were people who read every line of every contract, who understood that details determined destiny. They'd been waiting to see if Victor would actually be stupid enough to remove me before the signing. Another message, from Andreas in Zurich. "The Swiss banking consortium is prepared to withdraw if operational continuity is compromised." They were giving me the power to kill the deal. All I had to do was confirm my removal, and $1.8 billion would evaporate like morning mist. Victor's grand victory would become the most expensive fumble in corporate history. The elevator passed the 10th floor. The security guards stared straight ahead, probably wondering why I was smiling. They couldn't see the messages flooding my phone, couldn't know that every text was another nail in Victor's professional coffin. He'd wanted an audience for my destruction, but he'd inadvertently assembled a jury for his own trial. The beautiful part was that he wouldn't even understand what was happening at first. He'd sit in that conference room, Marcus fumbling through presentations he'd never seen before, trying to answer questions about relationships he'd never built, while one by one, the screens would go dark. Polite excuses at first, technical difficulties, urgent matters requiring attention. Let's reschedule when things are more stable. It would take him hours, maybe days, to realize what had happened, to understand that in his eagerness to publicly humiliate me, he'd triggered the very clause that made me irreplaceable. His own signature, carelessly given from a beach chair in Mexico, had sealed his fate as surely as he thought he'd sealed mine. The elevator reached the 5th floor, almost at the lobby, almost at the moment when my removal would become official, when the clause would activate, when the merger would begin its death spiral, all because a man with an MBA from Harvard couldn't be bothered to read what he was signing. The elevator doors opened to the marble lobby, all gleaming surfaces and morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The security guards gestured for me to step out, but I took my time, making sure my phone captured one last email from the legal department time-stamped at 9:52 a.m. Ms. Ward, please note your security credentials have been revoked as of this notification. Perfect. Official documentation of my termination, triggering Section 247 of the merger agreement, but that was only half of the protection I'd built into this deal. As we walked toward the revolving doors, I thought about the principal liaison clause. Elegant, yes, but incomplete on its own. Any competent lawyer could potentially argue around it, claim that the role could be transferred, that Marcus could assume the liaison responsibilities. Victor might even convince some board members that a 60-day review was manageable, that the deal could survive the transition. That's why I'd added a second layer, one that lived entirely outside the paper contracts. 6 months ago, when we'd moved to digital signatures for international documents, I'd insisted on implementing a military-grade encryption system. We're dealing with trade secrets across 3 continents. I'd argued to the board. We need authentication protocols that can't be compromised. They'd approved it immediately. Industrial espionage was everyone's nightmare. What they didn't fully grasp was the system I'd chosen. It required biometric authentication through a physical security key, one that generated rotating codes synced to the holder's fingerprints. Without the key and the biometric match, the final merger documents couldn't be executed. There were only 3 keys in existence. One sat in a vault in Zurich, requiring 3 board members to retrieve it. One was locked in our company's safe, accessible only to the CEO and CFO together. The third was in my purse, attached to my car keys like a forgotten flash drive. I'd registered all 3 keys myself, naturally, set up the protocols, established the synchronization, created the backup systems. Victor had watched me do it, had even applauded my attention to security details during a board meeting. He'd never asked who controlled the master authentication, never wondered why I'd insisted on personally managing the encryption protocols. He'd been too busy updating his LinkedIn profile with overseeing revolutionary M&A security implementation to understand what I was actually building. The security guards stopped at the revolving door. One of them, Thomas, who'd worked here for 20 years, finally met my eyes. "I'm sorry, Ms. Ward, this isn't right." "It's fine, Thomas," I said, adjusting my purse on my shoulder, feeling the weight of the encryption key against my hip. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from our chief legal counsel. "Natalie, urgent Victor is asking for the authentication protocols for the final signing. Says you must have left them in your office." I almost laughed. My office, which was probably being swept clean right now, stripped of anything that might help complete this merger. They could search every drawer, every file, every encrypted folder on my computer. They wouldn't find what they were looking for because it had never been there. The only copy of the authentication sequence lived in 2 places in my head and in the biometric key in my purse. Another text, from Marcus this time. Ms. Ward, Mr. Kane is requesting you transfer all merger-related passwords and protocols to me immediately. He says you're legally obligated. Legally obligated. The phrase hung in the air like expensive cologne, superficially impressive, but ultimately insubstantial. Was I legally obligated to transfer protocols I'd developed on my own time, using systems I'd personally funded before getting reimbursement, under contracts that specified me personally as the authentication authority? Victor could spend the next 6 months with lawyers trying to answer that question. Meanwhile, every day that passed without the merger closing would cost our company approximately $4 million in bridge financing, not to mention the penalties built into the agreement for delays. The board had approved those penalties, of course, on Victor's assurance that nothing could possibly delay the closing. My phone rang, Victor's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. This time I answered, putting it on speaker so the security guards could hear. Natalie, what did you do? His voice had lost its earlier smugness, replaced by something sharp and brittle. I was terminated. Victor, security escorted me out. You were quite clear about that in front of our international partners. The authentication protocols, where are they? The protocols are exactly where they've always been, under the control of the principal liaison for the merger, which, as of 9:52 a.m., is no longer me. You can't do this. You're sabotaging a billion-dollar deal. I'm not doing anything. Victor, I'm standing in the lobby of a building I've been banned from entering. Marcus is your new liaison. I'm sure he'll figure out the authentication system you approved 6 months ago, the one you said was unnecessarily complex, but signed off on anyway. Silence on the other end. I could picture him in the conference room. Marcus probably frantically Googling biometric encryption while 10 CEOs waited on screens for someone to explain why the final signing couldn't proceed. The board will sue you, he finally said. False. For what? Following the security protocols. The board approved. Implementing the exact systems you praised in the quarterly shareholders meeting, I have the video of you calling my security measures industry-leading innovation. Another silence, then quieter. What do you want? Nothing. Victor, I want absolutely nothing from you. I'm going to walk out these doors, go home, and update my resume. I'm sure my phone will start ringing soon with offers from companies that actually read their contracts. I hung up and handed my company phone to Thomas. This belongs to the company. Everything else in my purse, including my keychain, is personal property. Thomas looked at my keychain, a cluttered collection of car keys, house keys, gym tag, and what appeared to be an old USB drive, scratched and unremarkable. His eyes lingered on it for a moment, some dormant instinct perhaps recognizing its significance, but he said nothing. Security guards weren't paid to understand billion-dollar encryption systems. I pushed through the revolving door into the October morning, the city air carrying its familiar mix of exhaust and ambition. My personal phone, the one the company never monitored, was already lighting up with messages from contacts at other firms. Word travels fast in our industry, and public executions during international conference calls travel faster. But I wasn't thinking about job offers. I was thinking about the key in my purse and the elegant trap it represented. You see, the biometric authentication wasn't just about fingerprints. That was the surface layer, the part that sounded impressive in board meetings. The real genius was in how I'd structured the synchronization protocol. Every 24 hours, the system required a live authentication from the registered user to maintain its validity. Miss the window, and the keys would desynchronize, requiring a complete system reset that would take weeks to implement. I'd been authenticating every morning at 6 a.m. sharp for 6 months. It had become part of my routine coffee, Bloomberg News, fingerprint scan. Victor had no idea this was happening. Marcus certainly didn't know. In approximately 20 hours, when I didn't provide tomorrow morning's authentication, the entire encryption system would lock itself down. Even if Victor somehow convinced a judge to force me to hand over the physical key, which would require admitting to the board and shareholders that he'd fired the only person who could complete their biggest merger, it would be useless without my biometric data. And getting a court order for biometric authentication, his lawyers would laugh him out of the room. My personal phone rang. Elizabeth Brenner. Natalie, her voice was carefully neutral, the tone of someone speaking on a recorded line. The The Frankfurt Consortium needs clarification on the current status of our merger agreement. I'm no longer with the company. Elizabeth McCain made that very clear. Yes, we all witnessed that. However, we also note that Section 247 of our agreement specifies that changes in the principal liaison position trigger specific provisions. That would be a question for Mr. Kane and his new liaison. Mr. Kane seems to be having difficulty accessing the necessary documentation to proceed with the signing. How unfortunate. A pause, then, softer. The consortium is prepared to wait 72 hours for resolution. After that, we'll invoke our withdrawal rights under Section 247. 72 hours. By then, the encryption would be dead. The other partners would have fled, and Victor would be explaining to the board how he'd destroyed 18 months of work in 18 minutes of ego. I understand. Elizabeth, I wish you the best with whatever decision you make. I hung up and hailed a cab. As it pulled away from the building where I'd spent 15 years, I watched the upper floors slide by, imagining the chaos in Conference Room A, Marcus, frantically Googling encryption protocols, Victor, probably screaming at Aita to just hack it, the legal team discovering the authentication requirements they'd never bothered to fully understand, and those 10 CEOs, still on their screens, watching the New World Order collapse in real time. My phone buzzed with a text from Yamamoto. Ward-san, our technology indicates the biometric authentication system will expire in 19 hours and 37 minutes without proper maintenance. Most unfortunate timing. Of course Yamamoto knew. The man had probably reverse-engineered the entire system the day after we'd implemented it, understanding its vulnerabilities better than the people who'd approved it. That's why he'd insisted on the principal liaison clause. He'd known all along that I'd built myself into the architecture of this deal like a load-bearing wall. Another text, this time from an unknown number. Ms. Ward, this is Marcus. Mr. Kane has asked me to reach out personally. Could we meet to discuss a smooth transition? I had no idea about the termination. This wasn't how I wanted to get this position. Poor Marcus, ambitious enough to accept a role he hadn't earned, but not clever enough to ask why it was suddenly available. He'd discover soon enough that being handed someone else's job mid-flight was like being given the controls of a plane without knowing how to fly. The crash was inevitable. The only question was how many people would go down with you. I texted back Marcus, some advice: always read what you're signing, always understand what you're inheriting, and never accept a position that someone else was publicly fired from during a live international conference call. Good luck with the authentication protocols. The cab turned onto Madison Avenue, and I allowed myself one look back at the tower that had been my second home. Somewhere up there, Victor was learning what I'd known for months. He'd confused disruption with destruction, mistaken arrogance for authority. He'd thought that public humiliation would demonstrate his power, not realizing that true power was in the details he'd ignored, the relationships he'd dismissed, the legal stuff he couldn't be bothered to read. The encryption key sat in my purse, innocent as a forgotten thumb drive, worthless as scrap metal without my fingerprint to wake it up. In 19 hours and 36 minutes, it would become exactly what it appeared to be: a piece of dead technology, as useless as Victor's ambitions for this merger. My phone rang again. The chairman of the board. I let it ring. The cab dropped me at my apartment on the Upper West Side at 10:45 a.m. By the time I'd climbed the 3 flights to my door, my personal phone had logged 17 missed calls from board members, 32 texts from various executives, and one particularly interesting voicemail from our chief technology officer. Natalie, we've just discovered the authentication system has a 24-hour maintenance requirement. Please call immediately. I made myself a cup of tea Earl Grey, properly steeped, and sat at my kitchen window, watching Central Park dissolve into autumn colors. My laptop was open to a live feed of our company's stock price. It hadn't moved yet. The market didn't know the merger was dead, but it would. These things always leaked, usually from the exact people who had the most to lose from them leaking. At 11:15 a.m., my doorman called up. Ms. Ward, there's a gentleman here from your office. Says it's urgent. Send him away, Roberto. He's quite insistent. Says he has a letter from the board. Then he can leave it with you. 20 minutes later, Roberto brought up an envelope marked, Confidential hand deliver only. Inside, a single page on board letterhead. Ms. Ward, the Board of Directors requests your immediate assistance in resolving technical difficulties related to the Morrison-Kashima merger. We are prepared to discuss terms for your consultation. Please contact us immediately. Consultation, not reinstatement, not an apology, a consultation as if I were some IT contractor they could call when their printer jammed. I photographed the letter and sent it to my lawyer with a single question: any legal obligation to respond? Her reply was immediate. None whatsoever. Also, I have 7 firms asking for your contact information. Interested? Not yet. By noon, the story had shifted. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Financial Times. Morrison Industries merger faces technical delays, sources report. Internal restructuring. Technical delays. They were spinning it already, trying to control the narrative. But you can't spin mathematics. Every hour that passed without authentication brought the system closer to permanent lockdown. And once that happened, resetting it would require rebuilding from scratch new keys, new protocols, new agreements with all parties, months of work, if the other companies even agreed to return to the table. At 12:30 p.m., Patricia called from her personal phone. Nat, you need to know what's happening here. It's complete chaos. Victor had Marcus try to fake your biometric signature using a photo and some programming he found online. I nearly spilled my tea. He did what? It triggered a security alert. The system locked them out for 3 hours and sent automatic notifications to all merger partners about a potential breach. Yamamoto's team is threatening to pull out immediately, citing security concerns. Of course, Victor would try something that stupid. He'd probably Googled how to hack biometric security and thought he'd found a solution. He didn't understand that I'd built the system to punish exactly that kind of attempt. Every failed authentication increased the lockout period exponentially. 3 hours for the first attempt, 9 for the second, 27 for the third. By the 4th attempt, they'd be locked out until well past the merger deadline. Is Marcus still there? I asked. Oh, Nat. It's worse than that. Marcus quit an hour ago, just walked out. Said something about not wanting to be associated with securities fraud. Securities fraud. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. If Victor had attempted to forge authentication for financial documents, he'd crossed from incompetence into criminal territory. The SEC would be very interested in why a CEO was trying to hack his own company's security systems to push through a billion-dollar merger. My laptop pinged with a new email from Victor himself, sent from his personal Gmail. Natalie, we need to resolve this professionally. I'm willing to admit the termination was hasty. Come back as a consultant. Name your price. The merger depends on it. Name my price. 40 minutes ago, the board was sending form letters. Now the CEO was begging from his personal email. The escalation told me everything about what was happening in that building. I didn't reply to Victor. Instead, I sent a message to the 10 CEOs who'd witnessed my termination. Dear colleagues, I wanted to personally inform you that as of 9:52 a.m. Eastern, I am no longer associated with Morrison Industries. Any questions about the merger should be directed to Mr. Kane and his team. I've enjoyed our years of partnership and wish you success in your future endeavors. Professional, polite, and absolutely clear, the merger was no longer my problem. Within minutes, responses flooded in. From London, understood. We'll be invoking Section 247. From Tokyo, most regrettable, Yamamoto Corporation will reassess. From Singapore, thank you for clarifying, withdrawing pending review. One by one, they fell like dominoes, each withdrawal making the others more certain. The merger wasn't just dying, it was being cremated in full view of the financial world. At 1:45 p.m., the chairman called again. This time I answered. Natalie, his voice was strained, stripped of its usual boardroom authority. Victor Kane has been placed on administrative leave pending review. The board is prepared to offer you the CEO position, effective immediately. CEO, the position I'd been working toward for 15 years, offered not as recognition of my worth but as desperation to save their deal. The bitter irony of it almost made me laugh. With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, I was terminated this morning in front of international partners. Security escorted me from the building. The company made its position on my value quite clear. That was Victor's decision, not the board's. The board hired Victor. The board empowered him. The board watched him dismantle everything I built, and now the board wants me to clean up the mess. Silence. Then, the authentication expires in approximately 6 hours. 5 hours and 43 minutes. Actually, you know what this means for the company. I know what my termination meant for the merger. Perhaps someone should have thought of that at 9:37 this morning. The chairman's breathing was audible through the phone, the sound of a man watching 18 months of work evaporate. Natalie, if this merger fails, it won't just affect Victor, the entire company. We'll lose approximately $400 million in projected revenue, face penalties of $60 million for breach of contract, and see its stock price drop by an estimated 30 to 40%. I finished. Yes, I'm aware. I wrote the risk assessment. Then you know you're destroying innocent people's livelihoods. No, Mr. Chairman, Victor destroyed them when he prioritized his ego over operational stability. I'm simply refusing to be the safety net for his incompetence. I hung up and turned back to my laptop. The stock market had caught wind of something. Morrison Industries was down 3% and falling. The financial channels would pick it up soon. By market close, it would be a bloodbath. At 2:30 p.m., my doorman called again. Ms. Ward, there are 3 gentlemen here. They say they're from the board. Roberto, I'm not home. Understood, Ms. Ward. But I was curious. I moved to my window and looked down at the street. 3 familiar figures stood on the sidewalk. Harrison, Blackwood, and Tanaka, the old guard board members, the ones who'd hired me originally. They were looking up at my building like lost pilgrims seeking a shrine. My phone rang. Harrison. Natalie, we're downstairs. Please, 5 minutes. There's a coffee shop on the corner, I said. You have until I finish my cappuccino. They were already seated when I arrived. 3 men in $1,000 suits looking devastatingly out of place among the laptops and millennials. Harrison stood when he saw me, an old-school gesture from an old-school executive. Natalie, thank you for 4 minutes, I said, sitting down. Tanaka cut straight to it. Victor forged your signature on internal documents. He's been doing it for months, approving things under your name. It just found the evidence. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, pieces were clicking together. The strange approvals I'd been questioned about, the documents I couldn't remember signing. Victor hadn't just been planning to remove me, he'd been setting me up as a scapegoat for whatever came next. We need you to come back, Blackwood said. Not as a consultant, full reinstatement, with a promotion to executive vice president. The merger, Harrison started. Is dead, I interrupted. You know it, I know it, and in about 3 hours, the whole world will know it. The question is whether Morrison Industries dies with it. They exchanged glances. Finally, Tanaka asked, what would it take? For me to save the merger, nothing. That window closed when security escorted me out. For you to come back, Harrison clarified. I looked at these 3 men who'd watched my career for over a decade, who'd sat silent while Victor dismantled everything we'd built. They wanted absolution now, a way to pretend they hadn't been complicit. I don't want to come back, I said simply. Morrison Industries showed me exactly what it thinks of me this morning, but I will offer you something else. I pulled out my phone and showed them a message I'd drafted but not sent, my resignation letter, effective immediately, citing hostile work environment and constructive dismissal. My lawyer had assured me it would trigger immediate investigations, potentially criminal ones given the signature forgery. I can send this to the SEC, the media, and every member of the board, or I can simply disappear. Let you handle Victor quietly and move on with my life. That's blackmail, Blackwood said. No, it's a choice. The same kind Victor gave me this morning, humiliation or exile. I'm just better at structuring the terms. Harrison's phone buzzed. He looked at it and paled. Frankfurt just released a statement. They're withdrawing from the merger, citing operational concerns. Then Tanaka's phone, Tokyo's out too. The dominoes were falling faster now, each withdrawal making the next inevitable. Within an hour, the merger would be officially dead, and with it, Victor's career. There is one thing, I said, standing to leave. The authentication system has a failsafe. If someone with board-level clearance enters the override code within the next 2 hours, it'll extend the authentication window by 72 hours, enough time to do an orderly withdrawal from the merger, minimize the penalties. What's the code? Harrison asked desperately. It's in the security documentation I submitted to the board 6 months ago, page 247 subsection 18C, the same page where the principal liaison clause was detailed. You all voted to approve it. I watched their faces as they realized none of them had read it either. They'd trusted Victor's summary, his assurance that it was just routine security stuff. The entire board had signed off on their own destruction without reading a single page. Gentlemen, my cappuccino is finished. I walked out, leaving them scrambling for their phones, desperately trying to reach assistants who could find a document they'd blindly approved months ago. They'd find it eventually. I wasn't cruel enough to let the entire company collapse. The override code was there, clearly marked, professionally documented. But by the time they located it, understood it, and implemented it, several things would have happened. The merger would be dead, Victor would be finished, and every person in that building would understand that I hadn't been some disposable component of their machine. I'd been the architect of their most important deal, and they'd thrown me away like trash. At 3:45 p.m., as I was packing up my apartment, I'd already accepted an offer from a competitor. Starting Monday, my phone lit up with a text from Patricia. They found the override code. Victor's been escorted out by security, the same guards who removed you this morning. The board issued a statement taking full responsibility for the merger's failure. And Nat, they're framing your departure as a mutual decision to explore new opportunities. Your reputation is intact. Mutual decision. Corporate speak for, we fucked up but won't admit it publicly. It was probably the best I could have hoped for. At 4 p.m. sharp, I stood in my apartment surrounded by boxes, watching the city through windows that would soon belong to someone else. My phone had finally gone quiet, no more desperate calls, no more pleading texts. The financial news was running the story on loop. Morrison Industries' billion-dollar merger collapses amid executive turmoil. They'd found the override code, implemented it, and managed to withdraw from the merger with some dignity intact. The penalties would hurt $60 million, hurt anyone, but it wouldn't destroy the company. I'd built that safety net into the system too, because despite everything, I'd never wanted to watch the whole place burn, just Victor's corner of it. Patricia sent one final update. Victor's office is empty. They're saying he's pursuing other opportunities. His LinkedIn already says, former CEO. The recording equipment he set up to film your termination still running when security came for him, caught his whole meltdown on 3 different cameras. The poetry of it was almost too perfect. The man who'd orchestrated my public humiliation had documented his own downfall in high definition. I wondered if some IT employee would leak it eventually, or if it would remain locked in Morrison Industries servers, a digital monument to hubris. My new employer had sent a welcome package, Brenner Yamamoto International, a joint venture between Frankfurt and Tokyo that had formed, ironically, after watching Morrison's merger implode. Elizabeth and Yamamoto-san had called me within hours of each other, proposing something better than what Morrison had offered, a partnership where I'd help build something new, not just maintain something old. We need someone who understands both precision and relationships, Elizabeth had said. Someone who reads every page. And someone who knows that true power isn't loud, Yamamoto-san had added. It's in the quiet details that determine outcomes. They were offering me Chief Operating Officer, with a clear path to CEO within 2 years. The salary was 40% higher than Morrison had ever paid me. But more importantly, they'd asked me to design my own security protocols from scratch. No more building systems that others would ignore. No more being the only one who understood how the machine actually worked. At 4:30 p.m., I took one last look at the encryption key that had brought down Victor Kane. Such a small thing. Really a piece of hardware no bigger than a tube of lipstick, containing nothing but code and potential. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., when I didn't authenticate it, it would become exactly what it looked like, a dead piece of plastic and metal, worthless to everyone. I thought about destroying it, some dramatic gesture of finality, but instead, I put it in a small box with a note. The power was never in the key, it was in knowing how to use it. I'd mail it to Victor tomorrow. Let him keep it as a reminder of the day he confused authority with understanding. the day he thought leadership meant public dominance rather than quiet competence. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from my daughter Emma in Boston. "Mom, saw the news? Are you okay?" I smiled and typed back, "Better than okay. Want to have dinner this weekend? I have a new job to tell you about. And for once, I'll actually be there." "Really? You're not going to be in Singapore or somewhere?" "Really. My new company values different things. They understand that the best deals aren't made by destroying people publicly. They're made by building trust quietly." The movers arrived at 5 p.m. to start packing. As they worked, I walked to my window one more time, looking out at the city where I'd spent 15 years building a career that had evaporated in 15 minutes. But I wasn't bitter, not anymore. Victor had thought he was teaching me a lesson about power, showing the world that anyone could be replaced, that public humiliation was the ultimate expression of corporate dominance. Instead, he'd taught everyone watching a different lesson that real power isn't in the ability to fire someone. It's in being the person who can't be fired without consequences. It's in being so integral to the machine that removing you causes it to stop working. At 5:45 p.m., as the last box was sealed, I pulled up the conference room video Patricia had sent me, the one from this morning, recorded from Victor's own cameras. There I was, maintaining perfect composure as my career was publicly executed. And there was Victor, glowing with triumph, completely unaware that he'd just signed his own termination. I deleted the video. I didn't need it anymore. The best revenge isn't keeping trophies of your victories. It's moving forward while others are still trying to figure out what went wrong. The elevator in my building was smaller than the one at Morrison Industries, older, without the polished steel that reflected your worth back at you. But as it descended, I felt lighter than I had in years. No more authentication protocols to maintain. No more battles with people who couldn't be bothered to read what they were signing. No more sacrificing everything for a company that saw me as disposable. Tomorrow, I'd start at Brenner Yamamoto. I'd build new systems, forge new partnerships, create new value, and this time, I'd make sure everyone understood a simple truth. The person who holds the keys should never be the first one shown the door. The elevator reached the lobby. As I stepped out into the New York evening, my phone showed 6:12 p.m., 18 minutes past the moment when the authentication system at Morrison Industries would lock forever, taking with it any hope of salvaging what Victor had destroyed. I walked out into the city, pulling my coat against the October wind. Behind me, somewhere in a gleaming tower, a man was learning that the person you publicly humiliate on a conference call might just be the person holding your future in a device the size of a car key. The door to my building closed behind me with a quiet click, not the dramatic slam of revenge completed, but the gentle sound of someone moving on. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or public or dramatic. Sometimes it's just walking away and letting gravity do the rest. The last thing I heard before disappearing into the city crowd was my phone buzzing with opportunities, new companies, new ventures, new people who'd watched Morrison Industries' implosion and thought we need someone who reads every page. I smiled and kept walking. Victor had given me 15 minutes of humiliation. I'd given him a lifetime of remembering why. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate revenge, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in this situation? Your stories and perspectives make this community amazing. Until next time.